The checkered trend is not going anywhere, and I have fully embraced it when it comes to crochet. Hi, if you are new here, my name is Jo. I crochet quite honestly all the time, and I love it so much. This is one of my favorite projects I've made in 2024, solely based on the fact that I use it every single day. At this point, I've made so many of these bags, and I seem to show you how I've made them. Now, this is not going to be a formal tutorial or anything like that. I'm not going to get into the formalities of how to double crochet, how to chain, but I'm going to walk you through the process that I use to make this bag. Now, this project is very beginner friendly, but it's not going to be a step-by-step tutorial, more so kind of like a walkthrough. To start off this project, I am going to double up on my yarn and use two different colors, obviously, to create that checkered pattern. Now, with this project, I am going to start off with doubling up on that yarn on the initial starting chain, and I'm going to chain 40 stitches to begin our project. Now, this can be increased or decreased depending on the size of the item that you are creating, but for me, 40 chains was the perfect size. I am then going to drop the white yarn from my hook and only use the blue yarn to chain 3. Now with this chain 3, that's going to act as a first double crochet, so I'm going to yarn over and double crochet into the second chain from the hook. Now I'm going to carry the white yarn throughout these double crochets because we will be changing yarn colors to obviously create that checkered pattern. So if we count that first chain of 3 as a double crochet, we are going to then create 3 more double crochets for a total of 4 double crochets. Now, as we create this 5th double crochet, we are going to change yarn colors as we complete the last pull through of the 2 loops. Then once we have the white yarn on our hook, we are going to then double crochet 5 in that yarn color, which I'm using white, for example. Now, with these yarn colors in mind, I am using a KC yarn from Joann's, I believe. It is in the colors Gulfside and Ivory, but honestly, the ivory against the blue looks very white, unless you put it against like a stark white, but besides the point. It's a great yarn. It's 100% cotton, so it's going to be very washable, very versatile, and it is just incredibly durable and quite strong, honestly, too. And with a double crochet, it's not an incredibly tight stitch, but it's tighter than most. So I feel like even though you may have a few smaller items, unless you put like a bobby pin in this bag, for example, that might be something that actually falls out of it. Besides that, anything else, there's really not going to be much that's going to slip through those small little holes that a double crochet stitch will create. Now, as we continue with this pattern here, we are essentially just going to repeat that same exact step of basically just changing the yarn color in the last double crochet in each of those checkered squares. Now, as we complete the last double crochet in this first initial row, we are then going to turn to work the opposite loop of that initial chain, and essentially this will create the bag structure. So as we continue this pattern, it will kind of be working up besides just working out from that initial chain. Now, it may feel kind of weird to do this. Now, if it does, you're going to get used to it, but this initial foundation kind of row with these double crochets is a bit weird to maneuver, so I definitely feel your struggle there, but use that initial double crochet row as your guide as you kind of change your yarn colors, but definitely keep counting to make sure that you have 5 double crochets in each yarn square, or each checkered square, I should say, because this is a good time to make sure that your numbers are correct, so that way you don't have to undo the entire project halfway through because you realize you have 6 double crochets in 1 square compared to 5. Just a heads up. Now, the reason I love this project is because it's so versatile. I am using a weight 3 yarn, so it's going to be a bit thinner than most, and I love using a weight 3 because it is so versatile. Now, with that being said, I am using a 3.5mm hook. You could go up to a 4, even a 4.5, but I want to make sure that the stitches were a bit tighter, a bit kind of smaller, because I didn't want anything to slip through the holes that the double crochet would create, as I mentioned earlier. So as I continue on, I'm really going to make sure that my tension is as good as I possibly can be and as consistent as I can be to make sure, again, I'm not having any inconsistencies as far as the holes that my fabric is going to create. So I am going to continue this pattern, kind of repeating the yarn colors, kind of switching back and forth. And I have sped up quite a bit of this video because I don't want you to sit here for like hours watching me do this. But this is easily a project that you can make in one day. This is a great project to kind of bust that extra scrap yarn stash that I know that we all have sitting around our home at some place. Now, this project is so fun to make because you can change up the colors every row if you want to. You can change them up every checkered square if you want to. You got some options. So don't feel like this project has to kind of lock you into the standards of crochet. You can really switch up the yarn fabric types, the hook sizes you do. Have fun with it, but this is just what I have done with my project. So once I've gotten to the end here, I am going to slip stitch into that third chain that is acting as a kind of top loop of that initial double crochet in that starting double crochet row. Now I am going to use that blue yarn color because we are going to be working that opposite row now and essentially kind of working in rounds. Now when I say rounds, I don't mean we're making a round garment, but when I say rounds, we're more so kind of working on that initial chain and building up compared to building out from that chain. So this will kind of create that bag structure as we continue on. Now again, make sure you're always counting those stitches because you want to make sure you're not dropping a stitch, you're not changing colors at the wrong stitch there. It's always got to be consistent, especially in this first initial few rows here. With this project, I easily used less than probably half a skein for this entire project. Now obviously that will depend on the size of the item you're creating, what you're actually using as far as the fiber content or the yarn weight of the yarn you choose, and also your hook size here. But if you're using relatively the similar items as to what I am using with my materials, you should get a roughly similar size of item, but also a very similar look as well. Now, I love using cotton because it is washable, it's incredibly versatile, it's something that's very durable, it's not going to stretch as much as let's say a tencel or some kind of bamboo fiber content of a yarn. Now, with that being said, you definitely can use that if you're making like a coin pouch or something a bit more dainty and soft, but I wanted durability for this project, and that's what I got. So again, at the very end of the second round of double crochets, we are going to slip stitch to connect the rows. Now, we are going to slip stitch using that same yarn color that we will continue using for that following square. So this may seem kind of redundant at this point of me explaining this, but when I first started, I was really unsure about the actual structure of this. I wasn't sure if it was going to turn out the way that I wanted to, but once you stick with it, you can really see that pattern forming very quickly, and that is what gives you the little serotonin boost to make you keep pushing on, because even though it is very repetitive, the first few rows can be where you have to pay a bit more attention, so you can't really zone out too much at this point at least. Now we're currently working the third row, and now once we have completed that third row of that starting color that we chose, we're going to continue with the same color square or yarn color that we're using here. For me, this is white, and we're going to continue on connecting the rows in the same way, but essentially alternating the colors. So each of those checkered squares are going to be 5 double crochets wide and then 3 rows tall. So then on that fourth row, we'll switch over to the opposite colors. And now this is when you can kind of zone out, kind of get into that meditative state, because you can basically use the previous rows as a kind of guide for when you can change colors. So you don't have to really pay attention to how many stitches are in each row, because you have kind of already done your due diligence there to kind of chill at this point and get into that kind of flow state. And as you can kind of tell, that's what I was doing here. As I mentioned earlier, I definitely got into a kind of flow state with this. And also with using 2 yarn colors, you're definitely going to get them tangled, so you got to kind of unwind it at some points. But this project is so fun to create. It is definitely very repetitive. It's very beginner friendly because of that. But carrying that yarn color that you're not currently using and making sure that your stitches are staying consistent and making sure that you also mindful of tension, especially with carrying the yarn that you're not using. That can all be very tricky techniques that sometimes beginners can struggle with. So if you are struggling with tension, this is the perfect project for you. And with that being said too, this is also the time that you can really increase the size or the height of this bag. You could easily make this like a cute little tote or even something a bit smaller like a coin pouch. But for me, I was like, you know what, let's make this like a makeup bag, kind of emergency kit situation, and I loved the size. It ended up being perfect for what I needed. And if I haven't stressed it enough, this project is quite honestly my favorite project from 2024 so far. It is just so fun, and I have made, I think at this point, like 5 to 6 of these bags in all different colorways for myself, for friends and family. But once I have finally reached the limit to where I'm like, you know what, I think I might be done with the height of this bag. It's about the size I want to. I am then going to chain a few, cut the yarn, and essentially just weave in the ends that we have. Now, this part is where everyone has their own techniques and ways of doing this. For me, I just make sure to weave into the checkered squares that are the same color of the yarn that I'm weaving in, so that way they're a bit more hidden. And I just weave it in until essentially I can't move my needle anymore without ripping out the yarn. So once I'm at that point, I pretty much feel secure enough to cut off the remaining pieces of yarn. Sometimes I will weave in a little less than normal, but especially for projects like this where I'm not knotting the yarn together before weaving it in, I just feel more secure having as much of the yarn weaved in as I possibly can, since I'm not adding that additional knot. Now once I have all of these ends weaved in, I am going to start sewing the zipper in. Now with the zipper, I ended up purchasing one, I believe from Joann's when I got this yarn, but you can find them on Amazon. You can do any local yarn store or craft store around you most likely will have zippers, or even fabric stores definitely have zippers. Now for me, I used, I believe, a 5 or 6 inch zipper, so for me that ended up being just slightly too small for this bag, so I'll show you how I end up getting around that. But just enjoy this fun little bit of me weaving in ends. This is the one part of projects that I absolutely despise every time. I just don't like how repetitive it is, but also how annoying it is to thread your needle. I actually have a hack for it that I found on Instagram Reels that I'm going to share on my Instagram as well, because I feel the more people that know it is just going to help so many people. But I'll definitely give the original person credit, obviously. Now, this is what I mean where I slightly kind of mess up with the zipper. So now to start with the zipper, I honestly am not sure if this is how most people do it, but this is just what I do. I am going to thread my sewing needle, not my darning needle, and I am going to make sure that the open side of the zipper, so where the zipper head actually is, I'm going to close off that side to make sure that it's not going to go down or catch on my yarn. Now with this, I'm just kind of doing an over-under type of stitch here, really not being too meticulous because it is going to be something that will be covered, so I'm not really too particular with it. Now I did forget that I had white thread on me, and I didn't have to use this blue, but you know, it matched decently well, so I'm not too mad about it. But once I have completed that one end here, I'm just going to cut that off and repeat it on the other side, so that way even if that little metal clasp breaks, I still have a stop point for my zipper. Now I'm going to put this in and kind of gauge where I would need to sew up the very sides. So what I did is I threaded another needle and I closed up about 3 of the double crochets on the very ends there, and I just made that closure slightly thinner. What that will do is allow a bit more space for the end of the zipper to sit without kind of clashing and kind of inverting whenever I open up the actual bag. Now, I am by no means a seamstress. I have a very novice level of sewing, so that is why this is all sped up, because everyone has their own way of doing it, different techniques that work for different people. And honestly, I'm not educated enough to really show you a full tutorial on how to sew this in, because I am kind of just winging it if I'm being honest. But I have learned a few tips and tricks along the way, which I have tried to share with you in this video. But I'm essentially doing an over-under stitch and using the top kind of chain looking portion of the double crochets as almost a guide, and using that to kind of weave in and out with the zipper and going over and under with my needle to connect the zipper to the sides of my bag. Now, these stitch markers have honestly come in such clutch with every project. I recommend it no matter what you're doing, whether it's using it as a pin or an actual stitch marker. I always recommend it. Now, with this sewing process, I'm honestly making myself laugh because I know that this is going to make so many people who actually sew genuinely concerned, but you know, I know where my strengths lie, and sewing is not among said strengths. But I'm making it work, and that's all that matters. So I'm going to put on some fun little jazzy music and enjoy my painful experience of sewing in this zipper. But this process is not one that I have enough knowledge to truly share exactly how to do this. So I would probably just wing it the way that I am, but again, you know, there's YouTube for a reason. I can show you how to crochet. Sewing, maybe in a few years, but let's listen to some lo-fi and I'll hop back in a few minutes. Alright, beautiful people, we are in that home stretch of finishing up this sewing. Thank God. I have, you know, tied off those ends the best of my ability, and we are now turning in that bag to make sure that those ends can be woven in and the thread can be tied off to make sure that, you know, I'm doing my due diligence with making sure it's secure. You know, my sewing might not be well, but I will make sure that that damn thing is secured. If there's one thing I will do. Now, once I am done with this sewing, I'm going to cut off the ends of the thread as close as I possibly can, without also obviously cutting off the knot portion. And then I'm going to turn inside out this bag once again and take out the stitch markers to make sure that we're not poking ourselves when we're actually using this bag. And there we have it, you guys. The last stitch marker is out. We are flipping this bad boy inside out, zipping her up, and we have such a cute bag. I love how this turned out. You definitely need to tag me if you recreate this. I absolutely just cannot wait to see the colorways that you do. I cannot wait to see the inspiration that I get from it. But this bag is so versatile. Let me know in the comments below what you would use this bag for and also the size you would make it. I cannot wait to see your recreations. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for my next tutorial coming very soon.